Recording started.
Talk shoes.
Recorded live.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation or around the world. Once again, you are listening to the VMware Communities Roundtable Podcast. This is podcast number 507. My name is Eric Nielsen, and today I have no co-host, but today is Wednesday, April 15th, 2020, normally tax day. We are on the show. We are also live streaming on YouTube, so you can join us on YouTube or join us on TalkShoe. Our YouTube channel is YouTube/VBarbecue, BARBECUE. So come check us out and give us a like and a subscribe. On the show today, we're going to be talking about Kubernetes on vSphere. So we have some of the two great guys that have done a lot of work on that, Cormac Hogan and Kyle Gleed. They're here to talk about getting Kubernetes up and running on vSphere. They've got home labs. They've done some work on this, and so we're really excited about it. They're going to talk about a resource center where you can go get more information. And Cormac has an amazing blog with YouTube, with video content streaming off of his blog showing how he's got Kubernetes running. So we're going to go through some real-world activities on how to get Kubernetes running on vSphere. So that's on the show today. But before we do the show, thought we would just do a slight bit of news before we get started. So first off, hope everybody is surviving with COVID-19. We're in our studios at home as usual. So pardon, the environment that we do have, but we're excited to keep going week after week. And I hope everybody is keeping sane and accomplishing some work. There certainly has been a lot of volume around work and computer usage in general. So a lot of work going on in business continuity, desktop, Horizon, all of that, provisioning laptops. Dell's been doing it. So everybody stay in there, hang in there. I'm sure we're at least halfway through all the fun activity that we've been going through. So shout out to everybody. And Pat Gelsinger has done some great online updates on what VMware is trying to do to make life easier for our customers. So thanks for everybody hanging in there. Other things, Corey Romero's on vacation, but just give you a brief vExpert update. We did invite everybody to the vExpert Pros. I think we have 75 vExpert Pros now that have been selected. And the pros are around the globe. We usually try to select one or two per country. And those guys can act as resources to teach you how to be an evangelist. So if you're considering being an evangelist, want to do some blogging, want to do some tweeting, want to run vMugs, want to engage with the V community ecosystem, the vExpert Pro program is a sub-program of the overall vExpert program that helps you have a contact in your country to help you be a better evangelist. So thanks to all the vExpert Pros that are out there. Congratulations to all of them. And thanks for helping out, making our V community stronger year after year. So we did announce those, and we also announced sub-programs. So I'm very happy with the sub-program activity. I think we have 7 sub-programs now, across from cloud to desktop to storage to networking, and thanks to the BUs who are helping run those. So congratulations to everyone that ended up in a sub-program. And thanks to all the people that escalated their awards if they were rejected and they didn't think it was warranted, and you escalated it and we reviewed. There were some bugs, so we did accept people late into the program if we found out it was our evaluation bug. So thanks to everybody that engaged with us around those. And then also thanks to everybody that is looking at our second half vExpert nomination timeline. I think the calls for those go out in June or July, late July for the second half. We do a second call, and I think we've had over 1,000 people sign up to do an application for the second half, which is a large number. So thanks to all the vExpert Pros that are working with everybody across the globe to do that. So great shout outs to everybody that has been working in that program, and thanks for everybody, and congratulations to everybody that are in their programs. With that, I don't really have any other news, so we'll get to the show. So again, on the show today, we have Cormac and Kyle. So Cormac, I see you on the screen if you're watching us on YouTube. Cormac, nice to see you. Why don't you, we'll start with you. Why don't you just give me a 1 or 2 minute elevator pitch? How long have you been at VMware and what do you work on?
Sure. Hey, Eric. Nice to be on the show. So I've been at VMware almost 15 years to the day now. Started off one of the very first employees in our Cork, Ireland center. Started off in GSS, Tech Support Organization. Spent a few years in technical marketing. I actually worked with Kyle. We were on the same team. I think we actually did some VMworld presentations together back in the 5.0 timeframe.
Back in the day.
Most recently, I've been back in the day. So most recently, been working predominantly on vSAN and vSAN in a cloud native storage side of things as well. So that's why I got into Kubernetes and what we're going to talk about today. So myself and Kyle as well are now in the same business unit. We have a HCI business unit that focuses on VMware Cloud Foundation, storage, including vSAN and a bunch of other things. And so we've been kind of working not really side by side, but doing our own investigations into Kubernetes and vSphere. So that's, I guess, why we're here today, to talk to you about that.
Yeah, really excited to have you on the show. I know you've been old school. I think I've been here like 13 years, and you guys were a group of people that were already there, heavy into, doing technical work back in the day when it was all just P2V. So great to see you still here and working on, Kubernetes. That's awesome. Yep. So Kyle, why don't you give us the same kind of rundown?
Sure. So Kyle Gleed, I've been at VMware for going on 10 years now. And I spent the first 4 years on the vSphere team, looking after ESX, ESXi back when we did that switch with the 5.0 release. And then for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been working on the cloud foundation. So started out with VMware validated designs and working with the architecture team to kind of define this kind of modern prescriptive approach across the product set. So across vSphere, vSAN, NSX, and how do we bring these together into a unified solution that we can then make it easy for our customers to really succeed in this journey to what we call the software-defined data center, or now what we're calling the hybrid cloud. And more recently, I've been focusing primarily on the NSX piece of it, as well as the vSphere with Kubernetes. I just got done around VMworld timeframe with a big project for running Enterprise PKS on top of Cloud Foundation 3.9.1. And then we just GA'd Cloud Foundation 4.0 yesterday, and of course it comes with the vSphere 7 and vSphere 7 with Kubernetes. And so I've been focusing on understanding that, and in the context of Cloud Foundation and the broader kind of full stack private cloud solution, and that's kind of where I'm focused.
Nice. Well, good work. Before we go, I have one question for you. I've always wondered, on ESX, was the original ESX based on a Linux kernel back in the early days? I always wondered that. And this is just a total aside, but as long as you're here.
Well, I came in the picture around, we were running a 3.5, so it was virtual infrastructure 3.5, and at the time it was we had a Linux kernel underneath that would host the ESXi hypervisor. And actually the way I got introduced to virtualization was I used to work for Symantec, and I used to run with a product called Veritas Cluster Server. And it was a way to go into these big iron Unix boxes, and most of it was Solaris, and we would set up failover of big databases. And as Sun started to trend down and people started to go to virtualization, they were running virtual machines on top of these Linux boxes, and we didn't have high availability at the time. So I would go in and help customers actually use Veritas Cluster Server by just treating the ESX host as a Linux box, running some agents, and actually if one box would fail, I just restart the VMs on another box. And so I was failing over VMs by treating them just as Linux boxes. So and then I came into VMware, and I learned about ESXi and what we're doing with ESXi, and that was quite a revolutionary re-architecture of moving away from having that dependency on the Linux OS and going to this small hypervisor, very lightweight. And so that was kind of how I got started.
Now I understand that transition, right? People had always said it. I always assumed it was a Linux kernel of some kind or something there that had Linux. So it was underneath there. But then when we went to ESXi, we just discarded that and went to a lightweight hypervisor.
and this conversation we're having right now is very interesting in the context of what we're doing with vSphere with Kubernetes. Because if you think about Kubernetes today, these nodes are running on top of these Linux VMs. And what we're doing with vSphere with Kubernetes is we're basically saying we can run these, we can basically turn our ESXi host into Kubernetes nodes and run pods directly on them. But we just discussed ESXi is not Linux. So what did we have to do under the covers to make that possible so we can run native pods directly on top of ESXi? And what does that really do? What are the advantages to that? And that's part of what we can talk about today.
Yeah, which is really cool because VMware has always been in this hypervisor OS kernel level provide interface on top of interface. So it's not really that big a change to just, allow you to run a Kubernetes payload or Kubernetes directly on a new hypervisor. Or
right, yeah. And I kind of look at this as, what? We at VMware, we've kind of been there. We've done this already. We're doing it again. It's a little bit different context, but similar principles. And so and so it's been kind of fun for me because it's kind of, I've had a little bit of a flashback in some regards. I mean, it's not an apples to apples comparison, but still just this idea of what we're doing and how we're revolutionizing the approach to containers, particularly around Kubernetes. And then I think back to what we did around the hypervisor with ESXi, and I do see some similarities. And and it means a lot to me because I came from that background. That's where I got involved and started out with VMware.
Yeah, and just to go to Cormac for a second, the cool thing about this whole strategy is if you look at your videos, Cormac, it's like you're just working in vCenter, the console, all of these constructs. Even though we're talking way down low and how we're building this, when you practically start setting this up, it just looks like vCenter, and I'm just pulling in objects and defining things, and they look like VMs, but they're Kubernetes. So I got to say that, from my perspective, watching your videos, I felt like, oh, this is actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Maybe.
Well, I think our engineering team did a great job of making it easier, but there's still a lot of considerations. Yeah, definitely the networking and also the storage. There was an awful. Talk a little bit about the NSXT integration part. It's something that we spent a lot of time on with VCF 4.0, but also we've done an awful lot of work in the storage space so that within vSphere with Kubernetes, we have this concept of Tanzu Kubernetes clusters being deployed as well on top. So you're not just talking about the vSphere or the VMware opinionated Kubernetes, but also almost upstream Kubernetes that are available to developers as well. But I guess where we've tried to simplify things for the vSphere administrator is to make the networking more consumable and also the storage more consumable, and actually give the VI administrator full insight into what's happening with the vSphere infrastructure, even though developers may be working on a completely different abstraction, which is Kubernetes. So a lot of work gone in there.
Yeah, there is. And I say it's done easily, kind of tilting my head going, well, after watching your videos, I was still a little bit lost. So easy is kind of relatively, it's a definition, but especially when you get into networking and you just kind of talk through these concepts, and I'm like, all right, that would take me a few days to understand what was happening. But yeah, great, really, really nice approach. So let's back up a little bit and just start at the high level. So in today's topic, I talk about VCF 4.0 and introduction. Maybe we should just talk high level. What is this? I mean, most people know what VMware Cloud Foundation is, but when we came out with 4.0, what did we introduce here that then makes this all possible? Everybody knows that vSphere 7 has support for this. Why don't you take us through the high level? How would I put this? I'll put these pieces together.
Sure. So with the 4.0 release, of course, it's a significant release because we're bringing in, of course, vSphere 7. So prior to this, we were running vSphere 6.7 Update 3. So this is we get vSphere 7, so we get all that goodness that comes from vSphere 7, vSAN 7. In addition, we get NSXT 3.0. And those are kind of the building blocks for vSphere with Kubernetes. So we needed the latest NSXT version, we needed the latest vSphere version, and so with that, kind of unrelated to Kubernetes, but with that, if you look at Cloud Foundation, with this move, we've moved away from having external platform services controllers. We're now using the embedded PSC, which is of course the only option with vSphere 7. We've removed NSXV, and we have standardized across the Cloud Foundation with NSXT. So even inside the management domain now, we're standardized on NSXT. And with this release, as Cormac mentioned, there's been a lot of work into helping make it easier to consume networking and software-defined networking and software-defined storage. So particularly on the networking front, anybody who participated in the beta for vSphere with Kubernetes, which was under the tagline of Project Pacific, a lot of those people, they have to go in and you have to instantiate your vSphere cluster, then you have to set up NSX, and there's a lot of work that goes on there in terms of deploying edge nodes and setting up an edge cluster and setting up your T0 router, your T1 router. There's a lot of requirements in terms of IP addressing that needs to be put in place, and a lot of people in the beta, they mentioned that this was an area that they had to struggle through, had a steep learning curve. And in Cloud Foundation, we've tried to take some of the headwind off there by automating that process. So you go into the SDDC manager, you create a cluster. Very easy, point and click. You just tell it the name, how many nodes, and a little bit of information about the storage policy that you're going to use for vSAN under the covers, assuming you're using vSAN, of course. And then it will create this vSphere cluster. And then you can go into that cluster and say, okay, now as part of that cluster, NSXT was installed, the fabric was set up, and that's all automated. Now I want to put an edge cluster on there. So we'll just ask you some relevant information, and then we're going to go out and automate the process of standing up the edge cluster, configuring that default T0 router, and basically priming the environment so that when you get to that enabling vSphere with Kubernetes step, you can be assured that the NSX and the fabric is already there and in place for you. So that's a big part of what we've done with VCF 4.0, and that network integration is really focused on trying to make it easy for you to get started with NSX in a way that get you through some of the challenges, so you can get right into the consuming of vSphere with Kubernetes and not spend so much time trying to figure out, okay, how do I set up this networking to work?
Yeah, and I got to say that is I set up Raspberry Pis with Kubernetes running on Raspberry Pis for the Fun Lab last year. We try to do something fun with VMware code where everybody can go home, and you do spend quite a bit of time getting your network set up, right? I use Weaver, right, and getting things set up so that the network, and then the certs and security, so that
Right.
each it can all talk to each other. So you do spend half your time at least worrying about that network setup and making this all work. And it's got a little bit of black magic when you're trying to do it on a Raspberry Pi. So I can see when you're trying to build real production environments that this is something architecturally you have to really understand how to do it, whether it's east-west traffic or other components to your networking. And for a lot of people, maybe NSX, they haven't bitten off yet, right? So where a lot of people, I think, want to get into Kubernetes, and yet you have to face that networking piece.
Yes. And we've kind of we had the VMware validated designs, which if you're not familiar with those, so basically they're a set of guidelines where there's a number of different ways we could do this. Like when you deploy an edge cluster, you can deploy as active passive, active active. You can deploy using large form factor, medium form factor, and there's a lot of decisions you have to go through as you do this. And with Cloud Foundation, with the VMware validated designs, we kind of look at this from a production standpoint with certain key design objectives in mind, and we say, okay, what's the recommended way to deploy this, and then we document that. And you can go look at you can do a search on VMware validated designs, just vmware.com, go/vvd-docs, and you can find there's a wealth of information there, and you can find these different design decisions that will talk about why things are set the way they are. Why do we recommend using BGP as opposed to static routing? For example, it's something that's covered in there as well. And then with VCF, when we come in with the automation, we basically take those design recommendations from the VVD, and that's the way we implement it with our automation. So our automation is kind of a prescriptive, standardized approach. So it gives you a consistent way to do things that are repeatable and consistent. You don't have to worry about config drift and things because you're following this standardized prescriptive path, documented by the VVD, automated by Cloud Foundation. And again, a big part of the idea here is to make it easy for our customers to be consumers of NSXT, not spending all their time trying to design and implement NSXT. So rather, we'll get you there, we'll get you your logical routers, start consuming them, and start consuming software-defined networking as part of your private cloud, and not worry about, okay, how many edge nodes, what size edge nodes, what should I do active passive, should I do active, active, those types of things. We're trying to take some of that burden off.
I saw
think
that
that's.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's a big difference to how we used to do enterprise PKS previously. Enterprise PKS, which you could also deploy in VCF, you had to make all those decisions for yourself. So you had to make all those design decisions of how you were going to set up your edges, your NSXT networking, and so on. We're sort of taking control of that now in VCF 4.0 for vSphere with Kubernetes. And because it's an automated deployment, it's a lot faster to get it stood up.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I would agree. I saw that watching your videos. I was actually surprised. So I would drive people to your blog, which is cormachogan.com, I believe, where you have some of those great articles published. One, I guess I'll take this. If I'm a VCP certified guy and I haven't done any of this yet, what's my timeline? Let's say I have an instance I've dedicated, a vSphere to do this. What should I expect from a learning curve to come up to speed to be able to do this?
There's a steep learning curve, to be perfectly honest. If you're not already familiar with NSXT, that is certainly something that you're going to have to ramp up on. And then just to grasp Kubernetes as well and try and build that relationship between Kubernetes objects and components versus vSphere objects and components. It's
Yep.
It's not something that you're going to learn overnight.
In an afternoon, right? It's probably a 3 to 4 week process. At least for me, learning Kubernetes, also understanding the network piece, and I haven't completely gone through the NSXT piece. So maybe it's learn NSXT, go take hands-on labs, start to understand the concepts and how NSX behaves for networking. And then, Kubernetes was actually reasonably okay to absorb. I found it fairly easy to understand and start to learn. And then once you get those two components, then come through and try to tackle this exercise, right?
Absolutely. And we at VMware have the Kube Academy, or Kubernetes Academy. I think it's kube.academy now is how it's referenced. And there's a whole bunch of tutorials where people can get up to speed on the concepts and so on. So, it's another platform. So we have vSphere as one platform, but Kubernetes is another platform. So it's just really trying to make that alignment between, what's going on in the vSphere world versus what's happening in a Kubernetes world, and just trying to marry those two things up.
William Lamb, and I don't know which of you want to try to talk about this, but William Lamb talked about doing it, and then he put a comment out that kind of got some Twitter traffic, which is, once I designated my 128 gig micro server to this, I'm not going to have a lot of room to do other payloads. What's the footprint of kind of a server that you would need to have to be able to, build something that would run workloads?
Well, I think there's two parts to answer that. So from a cloud foundation perspective, what's the footprint to run VMware Cloud Foundation? So remember, when we talk about Cloud Foundation as a platform, we're talking about having the vSphere, the NSX, the vSAN. We're talking about the full stack, complete with the NSX manager nodes, the NSX edge node, and and if you look at Cloud Foundation, the minimum requirement for getting started with Cloud Foundation with vSphere with Kubernetes is 7 servers. So it's quite a big footprint, and this is an area we've struggled with Cloud Foundation in general, even prior to the vSphere with Kubernetes. Going back to our 3.0, 3.x days, is how do we enable customers and evangelists and people who are out there who just want to get their hands wet and get some experience with the SDDC manager, and how do we enable them to do this in a way that they can do it in a home lab and stuff. And we do have the ability to nest Cloud Foundation. We have something we call the VCF Lab Constructor. It's a tool written by one of the guys on my team named Ben Sire. And we use it internally for a lot of our own demos and testing, as well as our own training. And we share that and we make that available. It's out there on the, you can Google for it and you can get it. And when you just sign up, you download and it will give you the scripts. And then you can join the VMUG Advantage program and it will give you the license keys you need. Trial licenses, and then if you have a big enough server, I think currently we require a server that at least has 192 gig of RAM. But if in the VCF Lab Constructor in the docs, they kind of outline the server requirements, and you can stand up a full nested instance of Cloud Foundation on a single server and get pretty good results. But as you mentioned, like William Lamb posted, once you do it, and you get the infrastructure stood up, there's not a lot of extra room for doing things like standing up workload domains and doing some stuff. So it's not an ideal solution, but it's a pretty good solution for getting started and getting your feet wet. And that's for Cloud Foundation. That's when you want the full stack. Now, even without Cloud Foundation, if you're just going to go with I've just got a vSphere and I'm going to deploy NSX myself, you still have all the NSX objects. You don't have the SDC manager, but you're still going to have a pretty good footprint. So that is a challenge. And so, my thought is, the platform's getting bigger. It's getting harder and harder for people in home labs to kind of keep up. And really, we just have to turn to virtualization and turn to nested solutions like the VCF Lab Constructor as a way to get around some of these hurdles. As the platform, I think, is only going to get bigger. I don't think it's going to get smaller.
Right, and it's good to address that, just to give everybody expectations of what they would face. And then, of course, if you're in an enterprise and you're looking at a bigger ramped up Kubernetes project, then you don't really have this problem, because you're going to allocate the right compute resources to your project to be able to do this, right? So, and then there's architectural specking of this. So you said reference designs. When I need to go look at what's the spec for this, how do I need to scale? There's obviously your own application needs, but then there's the core infrastructure framework. So the reference designs you talked about, and you also talked about a resource center that I could go learn and get more information. Why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so if you go out to we have a Cloud Foundation Resource Center, so vmware.com/go/VCFRC, so VMware Cloud Foundation Resource Center, just the initials there. And that's a place where you can go, and it's built off of the same platform the Storage Hub is built off of. So folks who are familiar with Storage Hub know that's a place you can go to and get information about vSAN. We basically piggybacked with them and taken the same platform, and we call it the VCF Resource Center. You can definitely go there and get information, see demos. We just GA'd Cloud Foundation yesterday, and so I'm working feverishly in the background to try and get some updated 4.0 content up there, and particularly around vSphere with Kubernetes. And it's coming. It's going to just take me a couple of weeks. We were really late to the game in terms of getting the final builds in, and I wanted to make sure that I do my demos with the latest UI. I knew there's some changes coming. So anyways, that's one place. Another place is we do have the Cloud Foundation blog. So if you go to blogs.vmware.com and look for Cloud-Foundation, you'll find information there. So I talked about the VCF Lab Constructor. Heath Johnson, he posted a couple of nice blogs. There's a part 1, part 2 that's introducing you to VLC, and he talks about some of the stuff I talked about what are the physical requirements, what do you need, how do you get started, and so you can go there and get that information about that as well.
Nice. Yeah. When it comes to performance, right? I know we talk about our instance, Project Pacific will run it efficiently. ESX is we've always argued that VMs are actually more efficient than running on OSs on native hardware. Are we going to see some performance, rules which come to, like, when I'm speccing out Kubernetes and workloads, do I allocate X amount of percentage performance for having vSphere sit underneath this versus a standard Linux?
Yeah, so I think there are some validated designs that actually talk about sizing and architecting those different, let's say, workload domains. So we just take a step back. I mean, the minimum that you're going to require for a workload domain in order to stand up vSphere with Kubernetes is going to be 3 ESXi hosts. So that's a minimum. So essentially, once you have those 3 ESXi hosts, you then have to deploy your NSXT edges. Once they've been configured, we have the ability then to, from SDDC Manager, which is a component of VCF, to connect directly into vSphere and stand up the workload domain, which is essentially vSphere with Kubernetes. And then once your vSphere with Kubernetes is deployed on those 3 hosts, you then have the ability to build what are called namespaces. And these namespaces are a way of just divvying up the available resources that you have on that cluster. So you could have a multiple tenants, multiple developer teams, all working in different namespaces. And then within those namespaces, you can deploy the Tanzu Kubernetes clusters, the upstream Kubernetes clusters, for want of a better description. And these are what your developers and developer teams can work against. But for each of those namespaces, you do have the ability to set things like CPU and memory guarantees and limits. You have the ability to assign different storage policies to them. So you do have quite a bit of control over the resources that are assigned to each namespace, and thus what resources are assigned to each of the guest clusters that are sitting on top of vSphere with Kubernetes.
Good. Thanks for that layout. That's kind of what I absorbed as I was kind of looking through content. From a services perspective, I know we have Heptios out there, and I know we are doing some enterprise engagements where we're kind of trying to take corporations through how to lay this out and build an environment for future developers to engage with this. Do you guys get exposed to any of that, and how does that align with kind of what you're producing from a content perspective? So if I'm an enterprise or I'm working in enterprise and I'm starting to think about how to engage, maybe I need to work with VMware. Is there options for people to reach out and work with VMware to help you get across that threshold?
Well, for me, obviously they're we have our professional services teams, and for me, it all starts with prior to doing deployment, you want to sit down and you really want to assess what is it you're trying to achieve here. What are your design objectives? Are you looking for a solution that's going to sit inside of your data center? Is it going to have multiple availability zones? Are you looking at something that's going to have like vSAN stretch cluster? Are you looking for some type of BCDR where you have multiple regions and you're going to want to have some type of active with a recovery or a failover type capability? So each one of these, questions that you would ask the customer is going to really influence how you're going to design and architect this. And you start with the cloud foundation architecture.
Sure.
How many instances of cloud foundation? Where are your SDDC managers going to run? Are you going to tie them together with our multi-instance management? How many workload domains do you envision having? We haven't talked about a workload domain, but within cloud foundation, the way we allocate infrastructure. So if you think of taking your data center and taking those rows of racks and servers and looking at that as a pool of capacity, and now you want to be able to pull out of that capacity and you want to host workloads, whether those be traditional VM-based workloads or new Kubernetes-based workloads, you need to pull from that pool and create these clusters, and we call those workload domains. And as you create workload domains, how many workload domains, how many clusters do you envision having in a workload domain? Now that's going to have an impact in terms of how you can do patching and upgrading, because when we roll in updates, you have to update a workload domain by workload domain. You can have multiple clusters and sizing, and so all those things got to get taken into account. And then obviously, if you're going to be running vSphere with Kubernetes and you're going to instantiating a supervisor pod, the vSphere pod service, and you're going to be having Tanzu Kubernetes grid clusters on top of that, that's going to affect your sizing as well. Are you building this on vSAN ready nodes? Then there's some vSAN sizing guidelines that will come in. So it's a very, while we make it easy to deploy and stand this up, that's not to say you still don't have to think about the architecture and design. And that's where, we definitely would bring in VMware professional services and people who have that experience and say, help me out. And the VMware validated designs is a good source as well, because we do have the validated designs. They do have documentation that talks about the scale up approach versus scale out approach. you're running at the edge versus, you're running in a data center. These different scenarios and stuff are all covered. And so you need to understand a lot of those details and then drill into the details to really come up with a good solid design that's going to get you not only out the gate, but down the road, and well on your way to success with, a modern hybrid cloud.
Do we think there's demand? Do we think, we always hear about Kubernetes driven from the developer side. Do we think that IT can absorb this and then provide function that developers will accept, right? Like, do we think developers actually are just looking for solutions, and therefore, if you're an IT practitioner and you invest your time and energy here, that you'll be able to provide something that developers will accept?
I think as long as we can give them the same experience that they get from cloud-based solutions, then yes. So that's the challenge for us. So yeah, we're giving those, we're giving the vSphere admins that insight into how developers are consuming the resources. I think the other thing we need to think about is how to give developers that experience that they get with the cloud as well. And so I know we do have a lot of projects going on in the background to try and at least provide a similar sort of experience that developers get using cloud-based Kubernetes solutions. But I think this vSphere with Kubernetes is the first step on a journey to achieving that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The only thing I would add is I've been thinking a lot about this over the last couple of weeks as I've been working on materials for our GA launch. And today, what I'm seeing is there's a lot of, you go to a vSphere admin and you say, hey, I'm standing up a cluster because I'm going to run Kubernetes on this cluster. And they're going to, it's kind of this mindset that I'm going to dedicate this cluster to my developers and let them run their workloads on it. And that's great. And then I have this other cluster over here, and I'm running my SQL databases and my other VM-based workloads here. And so we still kind of have a little bit of this kind of compartmentalization. And if you step back and you think about the way we're defining a modern application, these modern applications are these apps that have containers working together with VMs and maybe some functions, and you have kind of this more complex application landscape. And it becomes a story of, how do I run my containers and my VMs together? And when you start getting into a situation where a developer needs to worry about his containers working with VMs because those VMs are providing some type of back-end service or something like that, and you need to run them together, that's where I think the two teams will want to come together. And that's where the vSphere admins be able to say to the developer, hey, you can run your Kubernetes here. It's kubectl. It's what you know and love. It's the same platform that you're using wherever, on your laptop or wherever. You can run that here. I can provide that to you, and I can do that in a way that I can give it to you in a few minutes, opposed to several weeks. And then I can have visibility into what you're doing. You can have control of what you're doing, and we can work together. So I think as we go down and we see this vision of bringing VMs and containers together in a common framework, that I think you'll see a little bit more of the two worlds come together as well.
Yeah, that makes sense when you start talking about service dependencies across platforms. And if you have already services running in VMs, then there's a lot of alignment there where you can have policies and network configurations and all that.
Yeah, and Cormac talked about the concept of the namespace, and I think the namespace is very key to vSphere with Kubernetes, because when you start running VMs and containers together and you create namespaces, you're going to have developers who are running workloads. So how do you ensure that the right developers are accessing the right things? How do you ensure from an IT operator standpoint, how do I ensure that I'm still secure, that when the auditors come in, I'm still compliant, that there's nothing going on in terms of jeopardizing my security stance or my compliance or anything inside that developer world when they're running on top of vSphere. And that's how the namespaces come in. And so the namespaces, that's a big part of it. And then I think too, just being able to go into the vSphere web client and be able to see an object and understand that's a TKG cluster. That's a master node. That's a guest node. This is my supervisor node. That's my harbor registry. And be able to visualize those things and see those things, it's going to help the vSphere admin become a lot more comfortable when they go to those developers and they're talking to those developers, because we're going to be talking the same language. We're going to be talking about the same objects, and we'll be able to kind of foster that collaboration.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, and I can see that. So as we're coming into VMworld season now, we just announced yesterday. I do a shout out to everybody saying that VMworld is going to go virtual. I would assume that you guys are thinking about doing some papers, and maybe that'll be online presentations now on these topics, just to continue to move forward. It's, for me, it felt like this was going to be the year that all the IT admins should come to VMworld, because this is something that you're going to need to spend 6 or 8 months investing in your career to move this forward, right? And I think it's the where you're going to see a lot of demand for compute resources is running Kubernetes workloads. Are you guys planning on doing some kind of online content now? I assume that you'll switch from physical sessions to virtual sessions. But are you guys planning on doing some sessions this year?
I am. Sorry. Go ahead, Cormac. I've been talking too much.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. No, you're good, Kyle. You go ahead.
Yeah, I have a few sessions I plan to put together. My sessions are going to focus largely on. I'd like to focus more on kind of maybe the level 200, kind of the introductory type things, helping some of these guys who are maybe not as experienced or who are really new to Kubernetes understand what it is coming in. And then some others, I'm working with some other people who will kind of get more into the weeds. But obviously with my background and my where I focus, focusing on, preparing the environment, what are the NSX requirements? How do things need to be set up in that regard? What does it mean to enable vSphere with Kubernetes and things like that? So, we have to go through the same process everybody else goes through. We have to put in our submissions for the call for papers. They have to get approved and picked up, and then we get notified. Then we go build those. So I'm kind of in the process of doing that. They just moved the deadline out to 1 May, so they gave me a little bit more time to put those sessions together. But then as the BU, we'll work with the BU, and the BU will have a couple of sessions that they'll get. They'll be able to talk about the high HCI message and working with the vSAN teams and people like Cormac. So yeah, there's a lot that we're several months out, so I'm very optimistic and ambitious. As we get closer to the deadline and those things start coming due, who knows how this will shake out? But yeah, the plans are there.
Yeah, and, from my perspective, I was thinking about doing something on cloud native storage again, because we've done a lot of stuff in the vSphere 7.0 release. One of the things was to be able to consume vSAN file services dynamically now as well. So if you had a pod or container that required read-write many access, which means multiple pods can write to the same storage object. So that's now in our new CSI driver, and a bunch of other things, support for vVols, encryption, snapshotting, volume grow, a whole bunch of things that we're looking at or have released already. Actually, you make a very good point about VMworld going virtual this year. Hypothetically, it could mean that we can have lots and lots of tracks on different things. So we could, whereas previous physical VMworlds, let's call them that, you're always limited to rooms and limited to numbers. But, if we...
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And I know, Cormac, you're in Ireland, so his network connectivity through Zoom continues to impress us. We'll see when you pop back up. But what I would say is that we've been looking at how many online sessions are actually spinning up today, right? Online sessions are growing. Even our podcast numbers are shifting just because of the number of options you have for online content, because everybody has shifted from physical meetings and physical events to online events. So on one hand, it's really good because to your point, Kyle, it could grow, or Cormac, I forget who just made the point, but it could grow virtually, unlimited. But at the same time, there's also more competition for your time, because everybody is spinning up online virtual content. And I see you're back.
Yeah, sorry, I dropped.
Nope, no worries.
Yeah, I dropped momentarily, but I get your point. Yeah. So It'll depend. I mean, I was just having this conversation with some of my colleagues earlier about how things could go, but it remains to be seen. But there could be a potential to actually grow.
We're actually seeing on the code side of the house, because we run the VMware code program, and we've just done call for virtual papers, and we're going to run them, 1 or 2 a week for the rest of the year, because you realize you don't even have to wait for VMworld to do these things. You could get started as soon as you needed to get started. So that's another thing that's optional in this space. Kyle, I have one more question for you, as long as you're here and live. Spherelets. I hear about spherelets, and I always try to figure out when Cormac laid out the kind of the pieces fall into this architecture.
Yeah, so the spherelets. So if you look at Kubernetes, you take your Linux box and you run a kubelet, they call it, which is a piece of code that runs on Linux, which basically enables that server to act as a Kubernetes node. And those run on, are built and written and run on Linux. And ESXi, as we start out the discussion with, is not Linux. So we couldn't just take the kubelet and drop it onto ESXi. We had to make some modifications so that the kubelet could run on top of the ESXi. In addition, we had to introduce a container runtime, a piece we call CRX. And so those were the kind of the down in the weeds. Those are the bits that get pushed out to the ESXi host. So when you enable vSphere with Kubernetes, we're going to push some VIBs out to the ESXi host. It's going to push out this container runtime. And it's going to push out this spherelet, as we call it. So it's a kubelet with kind of a play on the name for vSphere. Right. And it's just basically that piece that then allows that ESXi box to act as a Kubernetes node.
Right. So it's the kubelet, it's the spherelet. It's right. Just because we're running on top of vSphere that we had to do modifications. I'm assuming you took the kubelet source, which is open source, and then modified it to just run on top of our hypervisor. And then it gives you all the interfaces that a kubelet normally would give you.
Yeah, something like that. I'm not aware of the underlying details of what all they've done. It's very lightweight, and it's just that if you're familiar with the ESXi, it's just a couple of VIBs. Those VIBs get pushed out as part of the enabling vSphere with Kubernetes, and then you got your container runtime, you got your spherelet, and then you instantiate your supervisor. Now you can go run your kubectl command, and it can give commands to that spherelet and say, "Hey, go do your Kubernetes."
Right. Last thing I'll do.
Yeah,
I know
you could.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say it's essentially the Kubernetes agent. So when you request something of the control plane, this is how the control plane talks to its workers. And so it's that, I want you to spin up a pod, and I want this pod to have this networking, and I want this volume be mounted to this pod. It's the kubelet, or in our case, the spherelet, that takes care of all of that handling.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. We're coming up to the top of the hour. So first I want to do a shout out to you guys and mention your title. So Cormac Hogan, you're Director and Chief Technologist at VMware. So it's great to have you on. You and Kyle Gleed, your Technical Marketing Architect. Final kind of topic and question. I know that VCF 4.0 is out. I think you just announced it. When we talk about VMC on AWS and our other cloud providers, where are we with regard to VCF 4.0 getting that up and running in the various cloud offerings?
Well, with VCF 4.0, we do have a number of cloud provider partners who will offer those services up. Obviously, it will take time for them to bring in the latest code and to pull that into their service. So I don't really know what their timelines are. I'm not really in the loop on that side, so I can't really comment on time frame. But like with
I just thought I would throw it out there to let people know that it is on plan, and that if you've got VCF 4.0, it doesn't mean that your cloud provider has got it there yet. Right. So
yeah. So your ability to run, like for example, vSphere with Kubernetes on top of VMC on AWS, which is the hosted version of Cloud Foundation, and VMware hosted on top of Amazon Web Services Cloud. I don't know where they're at in terms of their timeline, or I believe they've had vSphere 7 for a while, and so it may be there today. I that's not a area that I'm familiar with, so I can't really talk to that.
But what I would say for all of you experts that are listening, and probably the evangelists, the 6,000 people we get listening, they all know our technology. A lot of them have home labs. So I think you've taken us through, the embedded approach, where to go get information. Let's do that shout out one more time. It's the VCF Resource Center. What's the URL on that?
Just go to vmware.com/go/VCFRC.
VCFRC. Perfect. And then Cormac, what's your blog again? Because I would send everybody over there too, because I love the way you do the videos and give me the screenshots and kind of take me through your voice over. Very nice. So how do people go find that?
Yeah, it's very easy, Eric. It's just cormachogan.com.
There you go. CORMACHOGAN.com. Hogan.com. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so thanks a lot, guys, for coming in. Cormac, thanks for being in Ireland and staying up late for us. We appreciate that. And as always, thanks, Kyle, for being here. Great to see you guys, and I hope everybody stays safe and stays sane and gets some time to take some downtime and go take a look at the new release of vSphere 7 and start to play with this technology. It's going to be a great learning experience for everybody, I think. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Eric.
All right. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Recording paused.
All right. Got out of that. It took me 2 minutes to find the menu. Thanks a lot, guys.
Good call.
Yeah. Very nice. Very educational. Yeah. Very educational.